Good evening, everyone, or good morning. Hello, this is Nothing Media. I'm Luchana, and we have a very special guest this evening. This is Jackson Peterson. Hi, Jackson.
Hi, how are you?
I'm perfect. How are you?
Always perfect.
Yeah, lovely. Just a few things before we start. Uh, you can see the link for Zoom, and you can most welcome to join us in the Zoom room, and you can ask your question directly to Jackson or share a comment. And of course, you can share whatever you wish on the chat, and I can read it for Jackson. So you're most welcome. You will see the link both on YouTube, on Facebook.
What's that?
I
What did you
said that
say?
there is a link.
A link.
So
Yes.
everyone who is watching us right now or joining us a little bit later on YouTube or Facebook can join us here in the Zoom room. But basically, we can start just like chatting a little bit. I'm curious because on our last conversation, I remember you mentioned something about deconstruction of the self. Do you remember?
I do. Well, someone remembering occurs.
Yeah. So if you
Yes.
can spot on this.
Well, I wrote a little text today that I shared with my groups, and it was talking about the illusion of personal intention and personal actions. That one of the things that seems to be ignored by most of these teachers is a conversation about the biology of our existence and how, if we use kind of like the neuroscientific description as a hierarchy, meaning a level of discussion, which we can do, we can discuss a lot about the brain's activity in terms of our mental states. Says if we take certain drugs, we'll have a different mental state and we'll think different thoughts. So we know that our mind is highly integrated or affected or correlated with brain activity, and that it's such a tight correlation that we can't really ignore the biological aspects and the evolutionary aspects of what's taking place in a human brain, in a human person. And it's easy to go into kind of a magical thinking and just talking about awareness and consciousness and higher levels of awareness and consciousness and a sense of self and a greater sense of self and a this and that, and just sort of isolated from the biology of what is somehow involved. Because when people are having various meditational experiences, whether it's high lamas that have been tested on EEGs, electroencephalographs, and so forth, they can correspondingly follow changes in their brain states with what they're describing, they're experiencing in their meditation state in the laboratory. So we know even like deep states of samadhi, and this produce different brain waves. And on brain scans, you can see certain different areas of the brain are being active and other parts of the brain are inactive. And that there's certain correlations between certain areas of the brain interacting simultaneously. And what's interesting is when there's this grouping of, I've read 7 to 9 different areas of the brain, when they're interacting, kind of talking to each other in a neural way, produces an effect in the default mode network, which is an area of the brain that's kind of like when your mind is just sort of in idle and it's just not really focused on anything, but it can ruminate or engage in daydreaming and this sort of thing, that there's also a process taking place to where these 7 to 9 areas of the brain are communicating with each other that you can see visibly on a brain scan. And at that time, it's interesting, if a person is being monitored during that time, he will be able to, because he's familiar with the topic, he'll be able to describe a feeling of selfing, a feeling of me-ness, a feeling of I, as his point of perspective, like it's my experience, I'm having this experience. And if somebody's been doing meditation for a long time, which a lot of these people have been doing, there'll be this correlation between their feeling the feeling of me. They know what it means when they say, I'm really selfing today, or I really got this strong ego feeling today. They clearly differentiate that from when it's not there. And when it's there, we can see that there's this correlation in brain activity of these 7 to 9 areas that are communicating to each other. So we can see that there's some sort of connection in the neural correlates that are occurring biologically. So the big question then is, this is just dealing with it on the biological level at this point. Let's, keep it real simple and down to earth and see how far we can go with this process, because neuroscience can take you really far into understanding how we form visual images, how we hear sounds, how memory can be interrupted through Alzheimer's and various other processes, brain injury, brain tumors, all kinds of things for the last 60, 70, 80 years and even longer have been documented medically. And they produce certain different types of psychological states, different types of mental conditions. And they're related very much to either brain damage, brain illness, a stroke. Various different things can affect them, but there's this correlation with brain activity in a particular area of the brain and the neurology functioning properly or not so properly, and will always bring about similar symptoms. So then they've been able to sort of designate certain areas of the brain where they would assign certain functions and capabilities. So in that whole process, we can just simply say, for the sake of our biological argument at this point, we could simply say that, is there an evolutionary reason? Because pretty much everything in an entity, an organism, human being is just an advanced monkey. A human being is 98.5% the exact same DNA chromosomes as monkeys, or we could say orangutans and gorillas and chimpanzees, advanced primates, that we're 98.5% the exact same DNA. And the major difference that you can find is in these prefrontal lobes of the cerebral cortex in the front of a human's brain. We've got more there. And it's a little bit more complex. And it's that area where they would say is the executive functions of the capacities of being able to discern, to think in kind of a strategic kind of thinking, more like playing a game of chess, being able to compute complicated mathematical propositions. That would be activating this particular area of the brain. And understanding that can kind of give us an understanding that the human is really a beefed up monkey. And so this beefed up monkey has all of the things that organisms have that's going on with them, their fingers, your nose, hairs in your nose, and eyelashes. All of these have survival benefits that have evolved over time as being assistive of survival in some way, in some form, at some stage in the evolutionary growth of the biological organism. So there's meaning to the functions and to the structures. They have typically a survival goal or some sort of thing that they're related to that they participate in. So for instance, it used to be when I was a kid, everybody would have their tonsils taken out. Tonsils, in the
Yeah.
adenoids and
Yeah.
areas.
Mm.
Everybody had them taken out. You'd get sick, you'd get a really bad sore throat, and the doctor would say, "Oh, time to take out the tonsils." And the parents would say, "Oh, and you get to have ice cream afterwards." And you go, "All right, let's go get rid of the tonsils." Well, my tonsils never got taken out anyway, because it never was a problem. But since then, we've learned that tonsils probably have an antibacterial antibody function in the body, and they actually shouldn't be taken out unless they're really diseased, and that they do have a function. Well, duh. It's like they're just there, right? They have no function. Well, kind of like the appendix. They say, well, the appendix has no function. I think they're still working on that one, trying to understand what's is it a vestigial kind of leftover evolutionary thing? And you
Yeah.
can have those things as well. But the point I'm getting to is there's this process of natural selection to where the monkeys that had certain capacities that were a little bit naturally better than the other ones that didn't have those same capacities tended to die off, and only the better monkeys survived. So it's funny that all the human monkeys, or all the humans, have this ego, this sense of self, this sense of me. And this for me was really an interesting thing going back to about 1976, 1977, when I would first start reading a lot of the Buddhist stuff that was really talking about this no self. And probably the most penetrating information that really shook me up, it really did, it really shook me up, was Chogyam Trungpa's book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. Because my whole thing at that point, I'd been in Buddhism since 1966, since I was 16. And so this was, almost 10 years later, right? And I'd been very avidly pursuing all of this stuff. And so the selfing thing was never really fully addressed in any of my experiences of reading or working with different teachers and so forth. But when I read this book, it really shook me up, because he was saying in there that the self that's seeking enlightenment, that whole drive to attain enlightenment, become free of your negative characteristics and be able to benefit others and all of this kind of stuff, he said, that is the ego. It's like, what?
Yeah.
What's left of me? Because that was my whole thing, was this thing of attaining enlightenment for the sake of all beings, and of course for myself, because I wanted to be free of suffering. And he really hit on that. And it's like it was like a little bit of a, not a psychotic break, but a kind of a borderline discomfort and discontent and destabilizing state of my whole existence. Like, wow, how does that work? And I remember walking around outside after reading that. It was the wintertime. I was walking out in the woods, and I'm just sort of shaking my head going, I don't get it, but I get it. I don't like it. So that was kind of like, how I entered into this. And so I really started then to get on to this I thing and this me thing and what this is all about, and having all kinds of interesting insights over the years and so forth. But the interesting thing is that one of the things I started to observe over the years, that everybody has it. It's like, for most people, they're born with two eyes, right? You're born with two eyes. They're there by default. And it seems that humans, starting at about 15 to 24 months, is what child psychology tells us, is when they first start kind of getting this me feeling going. It's when the software starts to kick in. It's a potential in the hardware of, we're just talking the biological now. I'm not going to go into any of that until later. I want to first take this hierarchy as far as we can take it and say, oh yes, this works, this works, this works.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to go to the dentist, you don't want to have the dentist tell you about the metaphysical meanings of the teeth and that they're not real or that they're Maya. And there's this, he says, no, just fix the goddamn tooth and do what you're going to do. I don't want to hear the story. So before we go into the story stuff about the selfing, we can just look at, the biological part of it. So since every human being typically would have around 15 to 24 months, this development of this self-feeling starts to come online as the child starts to identify itself and the environment and its possessions and so forth. This sense of me begins to build and grow and develop. By the time they're a teenager, they're really into their own self-image of trying to determine who and what they are, not necessarily psychologically, but even biologically in terms of the hormones, sexual puberty and adolescence and all that kind of thing of the human organism that it's going through. So this then is an early process of trying to identify who one is in a subconscious neurological level, like small lion cubs will go out hunting with the parents and kind of watch what they're doing, and then will play act amongst themselves, imitating the attacking and the biting, and they'll be play fighting like in doing that. And so they're taking on the identity that was being demonstrated by their parents, and then they're able to do that. Well, humans do the same kind of thing when we're 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, particularly where this identity formation is in full process. Our self-image is being developed at that time, and if there's very strong dominating people in our life, those particular people are going to have an influence on our identity. Because if you take the organism, then its overall goal is survival. It's going to try to take on identities that are going to be pro-survival, that are going to help it to survive better. So unfortunately, it's kind of a literal process. It's not like something that's intellectually logical necessarily, because a person could be having a parent who is abusive, violently abusive, or even sexually abusive. And that sort of power of that image is then embedded in this identity formation of the child in all kinds of strange ways. And that very often, if it's sexual abuse in early childhood like that, that person can be a sexual abuser themselves when they grow up. So we'll usually see pedophiles and so forth were victims of pedophiles previously in most cases. So you get this identity formation taking place based on the most dominant parent or caregiver in the environment. So it starts to take on this sense of identity, and it can be a bad identity, but it's the dominant identity. It's the winner, the one who won in the perceptual field. It was the one who seemed to be the dominant personality. So the organism would take over that type of identity because to the raw subconscious organism, this is the survivor, and the survivor's characteristics are those that you should be imitating because you want to be that dominant survivor. So that's why a very strong father, even a very strong mother, can have lifelong effects on a person's identity as they grow up, and a caregiver, an abusive caregiver or somebody like that. So the point is that this identity that we're developing in our life can very much be related to our childhood and influences we had in our childhood. And we notice that this holds true across all humans for the most part. I mean, I've never heard of an example to where it didn't really fit in. So the point is, since all humans have it, I would suggest that it's an evolutionary development and it's in the DNA, because the hardware of the human brain has the characteristic to develop this me characteristic to it, because it seems to have the corollaries also in brain activity being able to be seen on a brain scan and EEG when this is very active and taking place. Therefore, It's universal for humans, and it's a survival characteristic that evolved as our entire body and brain and activity and basic functions are. And it kind of like with this new hardware in the prefrontal cortex that evolved as well, a very complicated system of subconscious, ego, superego, and these types of circuit systems that are several levels of matrixing, of processing perceptions and correlating them to memory and relating them to action. In that process, somehow humans evolved a captain of the ship. There's got to be a single captain of the ship that runs the thing and is the boss. And that boss is the ego. It's a projection of the brain in this false illusion that I'm the boss, I am the one who's thinking, I am the one who's deciding, I am the one who says we go or we don't go, I'm the one in charge. But it's a neural activity. There's no one there doing it. There's no this captain of the ship has no clothes, so to speak. It's just these feelings, these intentions of being in charge, but there's actually no one in charge. It's this neural activity creating feelings of I'm in charge, I'm the boss, I'm this one, and it's my decisions, and I can make these decisions, I can do this, I can do that, and these are my intentions. So that's the normal situation, and that's the captain of the ship who hears about meditation or enlightenment or immortality, and that's where Trungpa was talking about, to where the ego gets hold of these stories of enlightenment and becoming free and becoming even physically immortal, and that you're even a spirit and you live forever and all of these kinds of things. Well, this captain of the ship loves this. This is the final solution. I
Oh,
don't have to
yeah.
die. I don't have to die because I'm not even the body. I am this soul, and I will survive after the death. And it loves the whole philosophy. It loves the metaphysics, and it will produce all of the stories and all of the endorphins and all of the various biochemicals to produce a feeling of bliss when you're into this, because you're thinking you'll never die, and it's wow, it's joyous in itself. And so this then becomes mistaken, this whole magical story of that it's a reality and that the self can attain to this. So now we've got the planet filled with all of these different religious traditions talking about after death and talking about, attaining enlightenment and liberation from suffering. And the ego loves that one too. Oh, I can be free of my suffering, but I can still have fun. I mean, I can still do the things I enjoy, but I can just be free of the bad things I
Yeah.
don't enjoy. I'm on it. All right, let's do it. I'm signing up. So that's what Trungpa was talking about, that one. That seeker, that's just more ego. And what is the ego? It's just neural processing. It's the captain of the ship trying to organize that organism feeling of self thing into a permanent immortal entity that can be free of suffering and live as itself. It's like the ego could understand a little bit of these teachings, the ego processing, meaning not like it's a real entity, but the ego processing this can understand this no self thing and says, oh, I see. So I have to be free of myself to be free and to be enlightened and to get this bliss. I have to be free of myself. Okay, I can be free of myself, but I want to be there to experience the joy of being free of myself. That's how it works. Okay, so I can get rid of myself, but I can still be the one who can enjoy being free of the self. Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
Perfect,
so funny.
right?
Yeah.
Perfect.
When
It's
you
like,
mention, yeah, when you mention suffering, yeah, maybe this is the fuel of searching, you could say, suffering. We
yeah, but
have
you
a
see, that
question.
goes right
Yeah.
back down to see, we're still on the biological level. It brings it right down to the biological thing, because it's like the archetypes are death and survival, life and death. And anything that's positive towards living further, better, with greater pleasure, that's on the positive survival side. So the organism will go that way naturally. It doesn't want to go into death way because the organism is trying to survive and reproduce. So all of these kinds of things are very attractive to the organism, to the human organism itself, because it's furthering the captain of the ship's goal, who has the job of sort of navigating to survive and survive better with total pleasure. That's the goal. You know, that's why people can get hooked on the drugs, is because whether it's cocaine or heroin or whatever the thing is that produces this tremendous sense of pleasure to the organism, that's all that counts. Like they've done many tests with rats to where they'll give it its food, it's nice food, or they'll give it cocaine, and the rat will first will have a little bit of cocaine, will start ignoring the food, will ignore the food completely, and will end up dying of starvation because it will only take the cocaine. Why? Because it produces all these endorphins and these good pleasurable feelings. So that's why people get so caught up in these different sort of religious cults and so forth that are promising, you know, nirvana,
Something.
heaven, bliss. You know, you meditate and your state of mind will only be bliss. You won't have suffering ever again. And so we're all meditating real hard to get there. It's like, oh, bliss, bliss. You know, it's like a little bit of it, and then it goes away, and then you're chasing a little bit and it goes away. So that's what this selfing is. But it's the important thing to see is there's no entity in here. There's no ghost in the machine. That's the self that's seeking. It's the whole neural process. This is on the biological level. We're not talking these other levels of prana and chi and chakras and so forth, because those are also valid levels. They're real. But we're just, you know, talking, you know, down to earth. How far can we go with the biological level without needing to go to any kind of magical thinking about that there's life after death and so forth and so on. We don't have to do that for a while yet. So we can discover, or it can be discovered, it could be scientifically, neuroscientifically discovered that this selfing and the person we think we are is just neural activity. A favorite example, there's a few, but I'll just give one of my most favorite. This is a medical case of a woman who her family became very concerned because she suddenly found religion. She suddenly found Christ, suddenly found the church, and started going to church every day and was just really into this evangelical kind of thing. But she had no contact with any of these people. She wasn't like brought into a cult group or anything. She was doing it all on her own. And the mother, they said that her mother, the whole life, she was like 50 now, and her whole life, she had never had any interest in church or religion or any of this. And just over a period of a couple of weeks, she became this fanatic, otherwise perfectly normal, not crazy or anything, but just had this thing and started going to church and was talking about, you know, church and God and all this sort of stuff. So it was such an extreme difference in that aspect. They went to their family doctor, and the family doctor said, have your mom come in here. We'll run some tests and so forth. And so they did, and they ended up doing a brain scan, and they found out she had a brain tumor. And they said, this is very operable. It's near the surface, but we do need to take it out because it'll press on certain sensitive areas of the brain and cause a lot of difficulty. So they took it out, and upon her recovery over the next few days and weeks, she never had another thought or interest in church again.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Never again.
Yeah.
So the brain tumor was somehow pushing on the neural processing in such a way to make her a religious fanatic. And it's like, aha. So anyway, so that's, you know, gives you a perspective on the biological side.
Yeah, that was interesting. I have a couple of questions here in the chat. I'm going to read it. Yeah, the first one is from Rajiv. Rajiv, yeah. He asks, what is suffering?
Well, it's like, you know, it depends who's asking and who they're asking it about. Like, is it a dog who was hit by a car and is laying by the side of the road whimpering? That's suffering due to pain and stuff and that sort of stuff. Suffering is, again, I'm not trying to give you the idea that my whole view is biological. It's not by any means, but we're talking about I mean, I'm into the, the chakras and opening the crown chakra and the third eye and all of that. That's where we're going to get to. But I'm trying to cover this, this biological thing. So suffering from a biological point of view is necessary because it tells the organism you're going in the wrong direction, dude or dudette. You need to change direction. Like if a person is walking into boiling hot water and it's getting hotter the more they walk, they go, gee, I'm suffering more and more. Every step I go deeper into this water, maybe I should turn around and go out. And as they do, they start noticing the suffering is going away. The pain on their legs is going away. And they go, oh, interesting. If something's causing me to suffer, I feel better if I leave it or get rid of it, the cause or whatever's taking place. It's just a survival thing. And so it's like if you're suffering and you're in pain, you try to escape that pain. Or if people are attacking you, throwing rocks at you, you try to run away. It's fight or flight, right? You're going to run away or you're going to fight them. So suffering is a signal. And like pain, it could be like, you're living in some strange place and you've got pain on your toes because rats are biting your toes while you're sleeping. you want to wake up and move your toes and get rid of the rats, or else
Yeah,
they'll
maybe
eat you.
maybe I can invite Rajiv and expand on this question. Maybe he means or she means something different than biological or physical suffering. If you want, you can.
But you see, it's emotionally, it's the same. I'm saying ultimately, now, if we're asking a metaphysical question, like why suffering? Why suffering? We need to answer it, first of all, in my perspective, we need to answer it first biologically, why suffering? And I just was trying to do that. That's why suffering. Then if we're looking at it from the metaphysical, well, why did God create suffering? Well, if there is a God, first of all, and if he did create creatures, it became a feature of their survival success to be able to differentiate between things that cause some form of suffering and those things which cause pleasure. And the organism gets rewarded when it moves in the direction of better survival, because it then produces endorphins, which are like artificial opiates that make you feel good. So like if we're having sex, good sex, so to speak, if you're having good sex, it feels good. And as you get closer and closer to climaxing, it feels really good. And all the endorphins are being released because they want you to stay with it until you orgasm and are able to complete the reproduction cycle. So the whole organism is geared towards pleasure, towards doing those things which cause us to have greater survival of our species. Metaphysically, if we're going to address suffering, again, it would have to, if you're going to say what's the reason for, I mean, what's the reason for trees? Or what's the reason for gravity? Why did he start gravity? I mean, wouldn't it be nice if we could just fly around? Yeah, but you'd wake up in the morning on the ceiling, you're late for work, you don't know how to float back down to get your shoes on, it's like it would be difficult.
Yeah.
So all of these things seem to have some kind of role, but I don't know. Let me just quickly jump ahead and bring us up to the point to where we can start to go into the secondary phase.
All right, I'm going to read the other questions later.
Good. Just
but later,
not much later, just a minute or so. Give me a minute or two.
Sure.
And so we've got this situation of this selfing that's taking place. It was noticed that people took LSD. Often they would have this experience of the self falling away. And when people would be, whether it was psilocybin, LSD, or some of these other types of psychedelics that have now been heavily tested with brain scans and EEGs and so forth, they do find a correlation between the selfing. They used to think that when people would take LSD that they would find the brain becoming more and more noisy and active, and it's the reverse. It becomes very quiet. Those active centers that are producing the selfing go still. And that's why you lose the sense of selfing on LSD. Not everybody, but a good number of people do. And that is a reason, and how this selfing process, the sense of me, can fall away. And then we can, talk about a little bit later as we get into these other hierarchies besides the biology of different ways other than biologically to reduce this one who seems to be suffering. Because we'll find out there's no one in there who's suffering. There's just these thoughts being produced that I'm a me and I am suffering. This is just a series of neural activity on the biological level only we're talking about, to where the organism itself is suffering. And it's got these self-image problems and psychological problems, and it feels depressed. It's not like you are depressed, it's the ego that's depressed. And whatever you are, we'll get to that later. But as far as what the ego is, it's a fluid thing. It's even more than fluid. It's electrochemical activity in the neurons. That's all it is on the biological hierarchy level. And that's all that's taking, and it can be addressed that way. And if you damage the electrochemical activity processing that's taking place in the brain, actual brain activity, if you interrupt that processing too much, as in Alzheimer's, with these amyloid plaques forming in the brain, where it breaks this continuity or this continuity of a selfing identity, and that starts to fall apart, the person doesn't even remember who they are, and even that they are. It can be just like a zombie, because all of that neural networking is no longer functioning, and they not only can't recognize others, they can't recognize themselves. They don't even know who they are, and that's because these neural activities are no longer functioning, which gives us a greater understanding of the neurological, in my perspective, the neurological basis of the ego and the sense of self. It's neurological. You can go really far with it without having to say, well, don't we have to bring the soul into this or bring past life self into this to get to understand the self? And I'm saying, well, not so far. We can get pretty far with understanding brain activity and neuroscience and biology of the brain that explains the selfing. And we can go really far with this without much problem. Now we run into this next hierarchy. This is where we hit the limits of the biological hierarchy. And it gets us really far. The biological could take us almost, for the human, it is all the way. For the average human and what's taking place, it's all you need to know, so to speak, how to keep your brain healthy, and then you'll have a better life. But what happened to me when I was doing my research as a young man in my 20s in northern India and in Saudi Arabia, and hanging out with the Sufis and learning their processes and meeting so-called holy men. I won't go into necessarily all the stories, maybe I will, but I experienced things with these people when this is 1977, 1978, 79, to where when I was in Kashmir and in Saudi Arabia and these places in the Middle East with these Sufis, these guys were the real guys. These guys were not people who lived in the cities. These were people who were out in the country, and they had small followings, but they were very, very highly respected. And so I kind of had a skill to be how to track these guys down. And then I had experiences. They taught me methods, kind of yogic type Sufi methods of expanding and opening the third eye chakra, very specific practices to do this, and looking into the sun, and a lot of different things that are really affecting your mental state. And so this is in my book, perfectly detailed in the first chapter, to where while I was coming back from a business trip, I was falling asleep in a car, and my friend Omar was driving. And as I was falling asleep, it was in the middle of the afternoon, it was like a movie started. I wasn't asleep. I was just laying there. It was very hot. It was like 130 degrees outside, and the air conditioning in the car was not doing that well. But I fell asleep, and I saw this whole vision of a car and a road and all of these things, and all of this, and almost an accident of having a head-on collision with us, and it just went right in front of us, and we rolled over 3 times in this whole thing. Anyway, so I jerked like this because it was so real. I mean, it was like I was watching a real movie, except instead of the light reflecting off of the objects I was seeing, the car and all of this out in the desert, This was in Saudi Arabia. And instead of seeing just that, it was as though everything was glowing. Light wasn't reflecting from the sun, but everything was self-luminous. That was the only difference between it and the real. And then I jerked like this, and my friend Omar, who was driving, he goes, "What's up? What?" I said, "Wow, I just saw something. It was like a movie while I was awake, like a vision." And wow, it was just like we were driving and it looked like this, I saw this road going out in the distance, and I saw this truck coming closer, and then it came right by us, and it went, and it started to just missed us in a head-on collision, started to roll over. And as I'm telling him that, I'm seeing this vision of this car coming right at us, and it looked just like the car I was just telling him about. And it just missed us, and he slams on the brakes, and the truck rolls over 3 times, and the guy gets out, and he's standing in the same posture he was in what I just saw. I'm just telling Omar this. And it happened 2 minutes later, exactly to the detail. And I was already telling him what it was when the actual thing happened. I mean, we were just missed getting killed. And so I thought to myself, I never had experiences like that. I mean, I wish I had had. But I mean, I never had anything like that or anything like it. I wasn't like a psychic person at all. And then he slammed on the brakes, and we were in this fast road out in the middle of the desert. And so I knew we had to get off the road. So I grabbed the steering wheel. And I said, "Omar," he was just stopped because we just almost had a head-on collision. And I grabbed the steering wheel. I said, "Give it some gas." And we pulled off the road. And I said, "Wow." And the owner of the US company, investment company, who was in the back seat from Colorado, he goes, "What the hell is going on?" He was asleep in the back seat. And he said, "What the hell is going on?" And I said, "We almost just died in a head-on collision." But that's not the good part. The good part is I just saw it just 2 minutes before it happened, identically to how it happened. I was so shocked. And Omar was concerned he was almost killed. It was like, it's like that had no interest to me. We're almost in a head-on. Yeah, so what? Let me tell you what happened, though, this vision of this experience. That was shocking to me. And in that experience, I said, well, how does that work? How does the brain, the biological system of the intellect and the thinking processes, which is neurological, how can that have a vision of the future? How does the brain do that? and I said, well, there's got to be something else going on here other than just the brain. And so then I had a clairvoyant vision dream when I was back in Colorado. And I don't have to tell you the whole story. That's also in my book in detail. But it was the same kind of thing, to where I met my Sufi teacher in this dream. And in the dream, he says to me, telepathically, because he didn't speak English, and I always had a translator with me. He only spoke Urdu. And he said to me telepathically, I saw him walking towards me out in this road out in India or somewhere. And he says to me, I'm bringing you, my Sufi name is Latif. He said, "Latif, I'm bringing you a message of death." And I'm kind of like, oh, and he goes, "Yeah, but don't worry. It's no one close or immediately close to you." And as he's saying, "It's no one immediately close to me," I'm hearing this ring, 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 ring. And I wake up and I'm going, ring, 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 ring. I'm hearing it still. Now I'm not in the dream in this moment, but I was woken out of the dream from the ringing. And I looked at my watch, and it was 5:30 in the morning. I was living in Colorado, and my girlfriend at the time, Carolyn, was in bed next to me, and the phone was down in the kitchen. We didn't have the phone upstairs. And so I ran down the stairs and answered the phone, because I figured somebody calling me at 5:30 in the morning, that it must be some reason. So I answered the phone, and it was Carolyn's mother, who's British. She said, "I'm at the airport in Chicago at O'Hare. I would like you to tell Carolyn I just got news that my mother's dying in England and of cancer, and I have to fly over there. They said I should come immediately. Just let her know I'm on my way, and that her grandmother's dying, and that I'll call her from London. And I said, okay. I got off the phone. I go, whoa. Oh, Gassim was just telling me he's bringing me a message of death when the phone was ringing and woke me up out of him saying that to me. And so I'm going, whoa, that's not a coincidence. And so, and he says, don't worry, it's nobody. I didn't know her grandmother. And so he says, nobody, it's immediately close to me and so forth. And it's like, and I go slowly walking back up the stairs, shaking my head, and Carolyn says, who was it? Who was it? I said, it was your mom. She's going to the airport at O'Hare, flying. Your grandmother's dying and of cancer and so forth. I go, but that's not the important thing. Let me tell you what really happened. I'm in this dream. And then afterwards, I'm going again. This is like 2 months after that accident thing in Saudi Arabia. And I was back in Colorado. And I'm going again and saying to myself, no, the brain can't create a dream of me talking to Kasim, because before I left Kasim in India, he said, Latif, anytime you need to communicate with me, you can do it in our meditation and I'll appear to you, or I will appear to you in dreams. Boom, bingo. I said, how does that work? How does the brain do that? How does the brain do clairvoyance? And how does the brain do this sort of clairvoyant dream like this? Now, I've had other experiences since then, but those are really the ones that really, because it was me and I'm the skeptic. I'm first the scientist. I was a biology student,
I guess almost each one, or not each one, but let's say almost, can share something not just similar, but some intuition that coming like in the dream, or I don't know. Can I just read some questions, because people here are start asking?
Yes.
Can they read some? Can they ask some questions?
One last sentence. So that's how we come to understand that there has to be something else mind-wise that's communicating at a deeper level than the human brain. Okay, so that's why we then look into this, and what we're doing in the Sufi practices and in the Tibetan Dzogchen practices and in the Hindu yoga type practices, Kundalini, we're opening up this third eye. And when this opens like this, you can see into other dimensions and you can see these clairvoyant things and so forth. So you have to activate this, and it's not dependent on the brain. Anyway, carry on.
Dean Robbins, we have a question from Dean Robbins. Since I've seen through my own separate sense of self, would love to help others close to me to do the same, yet they seem to be lost in the dream and are very resistant to the message. Any ideas? Would you like me to read it again?
No, I know, Din. Okay. And this is kind of like where I become the trungpa to these people. And I'm not picking on Din. This is just everyone that normally I communicate with, typically. It's like how Trungpa's message to me was about no self and the enlightenment. There's no one to become enlightened, and all of this is just ego. That kind of position, it's kind of like it's kind of like I took on that sort of role of deconstructing the selfing processing in others. So what Din had said there is talking about seeing kind of a spiritual perspective in life and wanting to share that with others that don't seem to be open to that and that sort of thing. But the question is, who is it in Din's mind that wants that, to have that transformation of a suffering kind of experience into a more enlightened view of life and perspective? What is that in Din that desires that to be the case? And what is it in Din is seeing other people there other than these biological robots, so to speak, of mental activity and neural activity? Where is the self in there that can come to an understanding? What if there's just neural activity taking place, where is there a self, a real self, that can understand these teachings, put them into practice, and can come to a true understanding of their self. What I'm trying to say is radically different than that. Again, a little bit like the flavor of this Trungpa thing, but from my own experience of having that have completely dropped away suddenly. And that, will be part of that. And that is that the one who is seeking to see that in others doesn't exist. It exists as a thought process. What do you mean I don't exist? Of course I exist. I am this, I am that, I have these memories, I have this, but that's just more thinking. That's just more neural activity. That's just more thinking, but there's no one in there who's doing that thinking. And then we're projecting that there's other people in bodies who can have a better way of thinking and can have a deeper spiritual understanding. But the whole point of this message is, and Tony Parsons as well, and several other people, and the Buddhas about anatta, no self, is that there's no self to do that. There's no self to have a higher understanding. There's no self to become liberated, not because you're already liberated, but there's no one there to become liberated. There's just thoughts about somebody there without there actually being somebody there. Like a child can think there is a Santa Claus and he's going to bring the presents, and the child has to be good or else Santa Claus will know if he's been naughty or nice. The child can be thinking all these things, but it doesn't make it that there's a Santa Claus there. It can think it all day and all night long, and it will not put that Santa Claus there. So likewise, we can think these thoughts about me and my life and my goals and my plans, but there's no one in there that has goals and lives and a plan. There's just these thoughts. So it's again, it's not a message that the egoic processing wants to hear, because it completely invalidates the existence of it. And this can only be really known is when suddenly something happens, where suddenly that selfing stops, whether it's LSD or whether it's psilocybin or whether it's some sort of process, something that happens, because it's typically won't happen in meditation, because the one who's meditating is the ego, and the ego is now trying to, become free of the ego. And so
I have, thank you. That was lovely. Yeah, I have here a long question, maybe. Yeah, this is not a question, like a comment from John Luna. And I would like to ask him if he wants to just to unmute himself and ask this or share this here with us. John, can you hear me?
I just wanted to point out to the person that was asking the question before that Jackson just answered, just that usually, people, there usually has to be some kind of curiosity or interest in the topic for the conversation like that to really start. That was really the gist of it, just trying to, have that kind of conversation. It just usually meets so much resistance. And then, I think speaking to what Jackson was saying, it's just, well, what is there inside of you that feels that that person needs to, necessarily change, so it's kind of just maybe going with the flow of life. And if it comes up, and you can have that talk, but if it doesn't, then that's fine too. So that was really all I was just trying to say that.
I mean, see, that's a very good answer, and it goes very much along with that understanding, but and this is not a criticism by any means, because I understand where that perspective is coming from, but it's totally not true at all, because there isn't someone in there who is actually an entity, a captain of the ship, who's concerned about that the captains of the other ships are free of their suffering. There is no captain of the ship. It's a story. The captain of your ship is a story. There's no one in here that can help anyone else, because there is no one else and there's no one in here. There's just thought processes taking place in this empty space of consciousness. It's like clouds. Empty clouds are passing through the sky, and none of the clouds have any inner core. You can't grab the clouds. Well, people are the same. They have no inner core. There's nothing in there. It's just this empty process of energy happening. But if you try to narrow it down and say, well, where in here is the person? I mean, the real person. We cut off the fingers, cut off the toes, cut off the legs, cut off the arms, cut more and more. And finally, you get to where you think you got the person somewhere in here, and you won't find the person. All you'll find is thoughts about a person, but you won't find the person. And the one looking for the person doesn't exist either. That's
Yeah, I
just
know.
the process.
I
That's just the
totally.
process that's taking place.
I,
So
I
wait,
to-
if you deconstruct it just another step further,
Mm.
if it's deconstructed, so to speak, not if you can deconstruct it, if it deconstructs itself, because it's a subconscious falling away of the selfing. It's subconscious. It can't be volitional. There's nothing that this egoic self can do to end itself because it's a subconscious process that's producing it. Just like in your dreams at night, the self you seem to be in a dream at night is a product of subconscious dynamics. There's nothing in the dream that you're doing to produce your body and produce the tigers that are chasing you. It's all arising as subconscious dynamics. You are a subconscious projection in the dream, and the tigers are, and the emotions that are being experienced are, you're being projected to be afraid. You're not afraid because there's tigers, but you're being projected as an afraid person, and tigers are being projected at the same time. So likewise, in the daytime, we have the sense of self of who we are, which is a subconscious projection that's no more real than the person you are in a dream at night. It's no more real. I'm not talking about the body or the biology. I'm talking about this self-image, this sense of self, this sense of me, the feeling of me is simply a subconscious projection. The same feeling of me you have in a dream at night. It still feels like me in the dream. They're chasing me, those tigers. Me, but it's just a subconscious projection. And there is no one in there. It's all empty. So it's like in these, towards further on in this conversation, we'll get into more the empty nature of your true consciousness, your true awareness, and this empty clarity of this transparency in which the universe and all of this is appearing, kind of like a movie or a TV show. And it's just appearing in your presence that isn't moving, it isn't changing in any way, shape, or form. And it's just empty. It's like empty clouds that have no core. But when the storm clouds are coming through, they feel really significant, but they're still empty. There's no cloud up there in the worst storm that has something in there. You can't grab it. You can't grab that cloud. Likewise, you can't find the self to grab because there isn't one. It's just got no core. All that's there is this misty kind of thoughts about it. And if you try to get that self to either get rid of it or to make it a king or do whatever you're going to, you can't find it because there isn't one that's actually there. There's just thoughts that claim there's one there.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think I was just.
Who does? Wait, who agrees with all that?
Well, I mean, there's agreement. There's agreeing. I call
There's
it.
okay.
There's just agreeing, right? You know, I get all.
Who
There's an understanding.
gets all that?
Well, I'm using regular language. I'm just.
Well, don't do that. Don't do that because we're trying to explore. Yes, I understand. I don't mean to be on your case in any way, shape, or form. I'm just trying to be consistent.
No, that's fine. If you want me to be precise with the language, I can do
not
that.
if I not that there's someone here that wants to be precise, but kind of
Right.
this precision responsiveness is just happening in response
Right.
to what's coming out of your communication, but there's no one in either place. And it's
Right.
almost impossible to have this conversation in this selfing mode about not selfing, because the selfing is always keeps restructuring, defaulting back to, well, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I understand. No, I do understand that there's no I to understand, but I do get it. It's like it keeps defaulting back to the old default mode of there is a self and it's doing that. And I understand there's no self. And I got rid of myself a long time ago. Yes, I did. So it's kind of a hopeless situation. So anyway, but thank you for your comments.
Thank you, John. Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Yeah, we have a comment here from Kevin. Actually, we have 2 comments from Kevin, or 2 questions, but I'm going to read the first one. So Kevin asks, is this mostly talk and no questions and answers? Now we are starting about 2 questions and answers. Is this a non-duality talk or a science class? If I'm allowed to ask, my question is, what is the purpose of this talk?
I think it came about where it might have been an email or a message came to this computer here, and the colors on the computer came to the photons, made contact with the eyes here, and created an image on the back of the retina. And then that electrochemical activity moving back from the retina along the optic nerve to the occipital cortex, where the visual processing was taking place, processed that email, and it was translated into something like, "Hi, I'm Luchana. Would you like to do a session?" And be able to do that. And a response arose, and the fingers went down to the thing and typed some kind of answer, and then send. And so here we are.
Lovely. We have a question here from Jirish. Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Sir, I have one question.
Wait a second. Where are you right now? Where are you? What part of the world?
I'm from India.
Are you in India now?
Yes, I'm Indian.
No, in India. Are you in India?
Yes, I am in India.
What city?
I am from Maharashtra, a state.
That's where you are now?
Huh?
That's where you are right now? You're
Yes.
there now? Okay,
Yes.
this isn't a trick question. I'm just curious. It's kind of cool. It says in here. Go ahead.
Yes.
Sorry.
I am doing spirituality from 15 years. I have question one that I heard lots of time when you realize, self-realize, or the people say, or you got enlightenment, then the wish of living die. How much, or wish of living dead? Is that true?
So what you're saying, let me just sort of summarize. So what you're asking is, when you attain enlightenment, you don't want to live anymore?
Yes.
Okay, so
Thank you.
that may or may not be true. I have never become enlightened, and I can guarantee you no one else has either. The reason I know that no one has ever become enlightened, because I do know for certain that there isn't anyone.
Okay.
If there really was someone, an entity, other than neural activity moving through the neurons on our biological level, if there really was an entity, a someone, then they could become enlightened. And then if they're enlightened, maybe they don't want to live anymore. Maybe they want to float up and become an enlightened being in a higher realm. If there was a higher realm and there were beings to be in a higher realm, that may be what they might do. But that one who would become enlightened in this experience here doesn't exist. No one has ever become enlightened, because there isn't anyone. Not to say that there isn't a body and an organism, but the self is a psychological creation of neural networks that can be interrupted through diseases or car accidents or strokes or Alzheimer's. And that self, who may have been avid for 40 years of seeking enlightenment, suddenly is gone. People come and visit him, his family visits him. How is Dad doing now? Well, he didn't recognize us, but he doesn't even know who he is or where he is. That's because there isn't anyone there. There isn't Dad in there. So that's this illusion of there being a self. It's just a completely unsatisfactory situation we find ourselves in, because there's no one there that can become enlightened. It's just the way the brain activity goes. Monkeys, horses, and cats, as best we know, are not seekers of enlightenment. That's because they don't have a self in there that's doing that. We got one of those. Well, some do. There's not one in here anymore, but there's
You can say
but that's the situation. it doesn't exist. And that's what the Buddha experienced in this anatta, meaning no self, anatta, no self, is the insight that there's these thoughts about a self, but there's no self actually in there. So since there's no self in there, there's no one to stop living after enlightenment or not. But that's the way this thinking is, it's like all these people are following all these gurus that are telling them to do this and do that, and you'll get enlightenment, and you do this and you get closer and you're closer and you keep getting closer. But there's no one who's getting closer, and there's no one to become enlightened. And that guru who's teaching people how to become enlightened is itself just a selfing process that's thinking there's real people to help, and that he's a real teacher or a person who has attained enlightenment, some sort of mental state that is, desirable for that ego. And so then he's trying to share that, or she is trying to share that with others of that same imaginary quality, which is still present in the thinking processes. Isn't that a horrible answer?
No.
I mean, it couldn't get any worse, could it?
It was beautiful. Would you like to add something, Jirish?
Huh? No, I actually understand, because actually I am pursuing spirituality from 15 years. Also, I am a science student. I know I'm actually doing life coaching. So I see and I connect with your actually sometimes some people also say the enlightenment is same as a self. You recognize self, where is self stop or nothingness, that we can say.
What?
All our mind.
That last sentence, I didn't understand your English. What? The last sentence.
Last sentence, that self-end.
Self-end?
Self-end. That's
selfing, yes.
Yeah, nothing self. So that also is the enlightenment. Some
well,
people
what happens is the subconscious mind. Okay, so here's the example we can use. If you walk into a dark room and you're from India, a place, let's say, where there's lots of cobras or snakes, and you grew up with that, right? And you always were told, be careful, be careful, be careful. And now you're in New York somewhere, and you're in somebody's apartment, and you've been drinking a little bit, and they have a rope on the floor that's coiled, and the room is dark. And immediately as you walk there, you see the coil in the dark room, and all of your conditioning, this is a snake, and adrenaline starts to run, and you start to get anxious, and your heart beats faster, because your subconscious has a memory about snakes. If you never heard of snakes, none of this would be happening, right? It has to require that you have a memory and conditioning connected with snake. And so the subconscious, it's subconscious. You're not thinking it. You're getting the results of the subconscious activity as what you call thinking. That's bubbling up from the subconscious. And so the subconscious is saying, this is a snake, this is a snake. And your friend comes in and he turns the lights up, and your eyes go to the rope, and you go, oh. Then the subconscious starts to say, no, it's a rope, it's a rope, it's a rope. And that it's identified it now as a rope. And so the adrenaline levels go down, the heart goes back to a normal beat. And the guy looks and he goes, what's the matter? He goes, well, it's when the lights were off, I kind of thought that rope was a snake. And it's like, oh, no, it's just a rope. My kids play with that rope and so on. But you see, that's how it works. The subconscious creates this sense of self. And instead of there being the rope, there's a body and a mind, mental activities, thoughts, mental memories, dreams, and so forth. That's like the rope. And our subconscious mind is in the dark all the time. And the best it can come up with for this mind and this body, not that it calls it a snake, it calls it a self, and it experiences it as me. So the subconscious is taking the body and mental activities, and it's giving it a self feeling and a self label and a me feeling and a me label, me. So it's the same mistake as when the subconscious misinterprets a rope to be a snake. The subconscious is misinterpreting the body mind to be a self, a me, because it's programmed to do that. It's in the memory, like you have to have the memory of the snake in your past, in your childhood about snakes. We have in the DNA memory from our early childhood and in the DNA software, this feeling of me, this selfing is there. And so it's responding to that. That's actually in the DNA. It's part of our evolution, and all humans have it. And so that's what's then is taking place. And what's interesting is when you turn the lights on, and in that same room, in that house in New York, that guy we were talking about, he'll never consider that rope a snake again, because the subconscious has corrected that error. When the subconscious sees that there's no self, it doesn't make that mistake again, that there's no self in a body or mind. There's no self there. It's imaginary, just as the snake was imaginary.
Yes.
Now, is that not a great explanation?
That is great. I'm observing that things.
What?
I am observing that things I am observing actually. The self, nothingness.
Who is observing it?
When I am observing myself, me actually, but not I am giving meaning.
No.
Nothingness.
Who is observing that me feeling, that selfing? What entity is observing that? Huh?
There is no one.
Well, now we're talking. Now we're buddies. High five. Now we're talking, but you see that's the tricky thing about this. If you really engage in a conversation like we're doing, that's the tricky thing, is that you say, I see that. I see the ego. I can observe it when I'm sitting meditating. I'm observing the ego feeling, that feeling of me. Yeah, but who is the one observing it? But what's there that's observing it in some kind of dualistic, relationship? There's me here, and then there's this ego thing over here, and I'm kind of looking at it. What is this thing? Is that the true self? That's the soul. That's the spirit looking down at this separate dualistic thing called the ego. No, this is just another morphing of this chameleon ego into this position, now looking at another part of itself, saying, I'm observing this ego thing. I see now what you mean, Jackson. I see it. It's very tricky.
Yes.
Thank you for your call.
Thank you.
Thank you, Girish. Thank you so much. So I'm going to read another comment or a question. Let me see which one. Yeah. Is meditation necessary?
For whom?
Are techniques like pointers can help in achieve liberation?
Liberation for whom? Pablo? Liberation for whom? Or who? For whom? Who will meditation benefit? And who will become liberated? You see, there is no self to liberate because it isn't there. It's kind of like this. I'm in this dream. Tigers are chasing me. I got to find a way out because I know they're going to eat me. And I wake up in my bed from this dream, right? Now I'm laying in bed. Oh my God, that was a terrible dream. Oh my God, how am I going to get away from those tigers? Well, wait a second. Oh, that was the dream. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, but still, how am I going to get away from those tigers? How am I going to get that self that was produced in the dream doesn't exist. When you wake up, it's not like it's hidden under your pillow until you go to sleep again. It's a projection of your subconscious mind. And this self that you're experiencing right now is also a subconscious projection. And it's no more real. And it's made up of memories and conditioning and this DNA software thing going on neurologically. And it's producing this me self. So there isn't anyone there at all. Okay.
Another question from Kevin. Kevin goes, isn't anatta I'm not familiar with this, but I don't know this is the right pronunciation. Anatta or anatta?
Okay, both.
Just another concept. Who will know that there is no self?
No one. Because there's no one to note that. See, that's the tricky thing. People will say, you know, whether it's on this group called Liberation Unleashed or whatever, but, you know, you hear often in these dialogues, somebody said, yes, when I realized that I'm not the self or there is no self, oh my God, I felt so much better. And now I see it. You know, it's like, huh? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? It's like there isn't anyone there. Next.
Another comment. The ego is so very much into itself. Even the story of its own supposed demise, way too dramatic. Call him on his bullshit every time.
Well, you see, there isn't an ego. There's thoughts about an ego. You know, we make this into an entity. Like there's this ego entity that acts this way, acts that way. You know, I got angry with my girlfriend and this and that, but that was just my ego. And it's like my ego. And if you look at this, it just makes no sense whatsoever. Because if we're just staying just for the sake of deconstruction, at the neurological level. That's why it's so useful. If you, just for the sake of deconstructing these reifications of self, taking the notion that all thoughts are just neurological activity that's dependently originated upon conditioning, and that there's no one in there doing any of it or causing or thinking or doing or acting, that is just the energies of the universe functioning. But there's no one in that function. It's like the weather outside. When it's stormy and raining and so forth, there isn't a rain god or a storm god or a thunder god doing any of that. It's just natural atmospheric conditions. This is natural atmospheric conditions in terms of what's occurring in your brain and your mind. There's no one in there doing any of it. It's dependent on gravity. It's dependent on air. It's dependent on brain chemicals. It's dependent on the whole matrix of dependent origination of these various supporting contingencies that extend outward infinitely in all directions, which is called dependent origination in Buddhism, where the Buddha said there is no self in any of that. It's just like a big, not to make it purely mechanical, but it's like it's a big machine that's just functioning. This is a deconstructive tool to say that. It's like there's just this machine that's functioning. The whole universe is just functioning like this big machine, and there's no one in there doing it. But it is dependent on the other parts of the machine functioning. Like an automobile is dependent on there being gasoline, and that there being tires that are flat, that there's an engine that works, and that there's enough electricity in the battery, and on and on and on. All these dependencies in order to make the car work. But no one of them is the car more than any other part. So there's no self that's more a self than memories, thoughts, mental activity, brain chemicals, food, the biobacteria in your intestines that are making the various chemicals that relate to our mental states, which they do. And all of these various things are necessary, including gravity. And all of that functioning together is what's producing this selfing. It's just a natural occurrence like rain or snow and all of that. It's not spiritual, it's nothing. It's just neurological activity taking place. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there are a couple of comments and questions. I'm going to read one, and then Girish is here again. And I would like to ask Akshop, I'm not sure I can pronounce your name, Vajra, Akshobhya Vajra.
Oh, I know Akshobhya Vajra. Go ahead.
All right. Would you like to join us? There is a Zoom link, and we have maybe 15 minutes. Yeah, 10 minutes left. Never mind. You can join us here, and you can just ask Jackson all these questions or make a comment as you wish. So I'm going to read another comment and then Girish. LU, this is Liberation Unleashed. This is from Mike. Mike asks, LU aftercare is about that condition of asking what's next? This is the question.
Go slower with that. I didn't understand the question.
LU, Liberation
LU.
Unleashed. Yes, aftercare.
Oh,
There is a
LU. Liberation
yeah,
Unleashed.
LU.
Okay.
Yeah, aftercare is about that condition of asking what's next.
What's the question? I mean, I understand the words, but what's the question
Maybe,
for me?
as far as I can understand, maybe we can invite also Mike, but there is a group aftercare on the forum. And he asked probably if that group is about the conditioning of asking what's next. Okay.
Or maybe that's supposed to be the answer to the idea of when the self kind of falls away, what's next?
Yeah, probably.
And if there's a what's next, then the self hasn't fallen away. Because when the self falls away, there isn't a what's next. That question doesn't arise. There isn't a next. Unless the self is rearisen, then it's like, oh, I see there's no self. So now what's next?
Yeah, agree. Girish, would you like to add something?
No, I have one question. Sir, sometimes I feel that the nothingness can't express itself. So do you think that they need the self or I for this life?
Who? Does who need
All
the
people,
self?
all our people. When we express our story or saying or conversation.
Well, you see, it's evolved. It's an evolved illusion to have a captain of the ship. And because it's evolved, it's that self that seeks suffering. It's that self that seeks enlightenment. And it's an illusion that was developed to organize these complex, what they call executive functions of the prefrontal cortex of the brain that make certain types of decisions that can overrule other types of decisions. So it's like, how do we keep the reptilian brain, the lizard brain, under control that wants to have sex with everything it can see? And then this captain of the ship says, well, if we do that, we're going to be in prison. And so it acts kind of like a superego, and it can, change behavior patterns. So in a certain sense, it can tame the most animalistic and most selfish animal type of instincts down in that respect. But now it seems that we've come to a certain place in our evolution to where that no longer seems to be of value, because it's the sole reason that there's wars, it's sole reasons that there's divorces, it's the sole reasons there's abuse, child abuse, and criminality. It's because of this selfing mechanism that's seeing itself, creating the organism to feel it's separate from the rest of nature. It's separate from the rest of the organisms. It's a separate kind of thing. And so all it can do is function in that level. But if there can be an intervention, so to speak, to where everybody surreptitiously is given a special kind of LSD that makes the selfing cease in the subconscious permanently, that would be marvelous. But because it would bring a better condition for the organisms on the planet. This again is on the biological organism level of talk, of being able to do that. But it's something that is producing the suffering. And without that psychological suffering wouldn't be there. So it's kind of like it was good for probably, I don't know, maybe 500,000 years, but now it's becoming clear to more and more people that the ego part of the human, which is in all of the teachings, they say you have to get beyond this sense of self that's being projected by the mind, and that has to cease. It has to stop. And only then, when it stops, this is the interesting thing, this is where we kind of lead in towards the end of this, is that when that selfing ceases, there's a certain change in the brain activity. When that selfing ceases and the subconscious ceases producing that, and here there was this tremendous, it was spontaneous, there was this tremendous expansion in the heart chakra area. It was like this feeling of, and there was just this huge openness in the heart and in the throat chakra. And it was like it went all the way through my back. It was though there was just an open hole on both sides. It was just open all the way through. And this expansiveness was absolutely beyond there being any kind of self. And in that condition, the subtle body chakras of the crown chakra and the third eye chakra in particular, they begin to become active. And you start to function with the third eye chakra and the crown chakra, and you start to perceive with these, what they would call extrasensory perceptions of telepathy and clairvoyance, and particularly with students that I've worked with for a long time, they'll be talking about synchronicities occurring, strange coincidences that can't be explained. I could tell you about one that happened today and yesterday that was just unbelievable. But these happen all more and more, where something in the external world coordinates completely detached from your, like just as a real rough example, you haven't talked to somebody for 20 years, and then one day you're looking in a book or something, and that person is in your school yearbook or something. You go, God, I wonder what that person's doing. And when the next 2 minutes they call you, like, what? Where are you living now? Oh, I'm living in California. How did you get my name? I was looking in the yearbook and blah, 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 blah. It's like, that sort of stuff happens more and more. And that is getting beyond the brain consciousness. And you're getting into this other consciousness that doesn't involve a self. And you can't take, a self can't go there. The entry in, like if you're trying to get into a nightclub at night, and you've got to give some sort of entry pass or something, or you're going through the gate, right? You can't get through that gate without leaving that self on the other side. And there's no you that's going through the gate. See, that's the beauty of it. But then this other dimension is opening up to no one, but it's nonetheless, it's opening up, and it's not being experienced by a self, but the self keeps picturing this as something that's going to be happening to me if I'm lucky. But that one won't be there. It won't be, that one won't even get an invitation to be there. It so completely won't be there. And then this other level of consciousness of clairvoyance and this unconditional love, just as this expansiveness of being that has no location in space or time. Then what occurs? And it doesn't have to be progressive like that. This can be occurring anytime in the process. This could happen to you today. You're doing some sort of thing. And suddenly there's a shift. It's like a mirror and the reflections. Listen to this carefully, because this is the closest analogy I can give to and actually have it be accurate. It's like you're this reflection in a mirror. Like you look in a mirror and there's a reflection, and there's this reflection in the mirror, and this entity in the mirror is looking for the mirror. The reflection is, like you're the reflection and you're in the mirror, but you're not the mirror. You're the reflection in the mirror, the image. And you're looking because you've heard about it. Other images in the mirror have told you there is this thing that's called the mirror, and it's unchanged, and it's transparent, and it's crystal clear, and it never changes. But it's that which knows all of the reflections that are taking place. And so you as a reflection, you're saying, God, I want to find that mirror. I want to find that mirror. I want to find that mirror. And you keep looking for that mirror. Where the mirror is around here somewhere. Now the reflection's in the mirror, and it's looking for this reflection in the mirror, and it's looking for the mirror. And what suddenly will happen spontaneously, it has to be, because it can't be kind of a cause and effect kind of thing directly. And then suddenly it switches. And now you are the consciousness of the mirror, observing the reflection, looking for the mirror. But now you're experiencing it from the mirror perspective, the absolute. You are the absolute, experiencing the kind of seeking self as being a projection of the mirror itself. And so you realize that you are the absolute projecting the self that's looking for its true self. That's as far as this goes.
Thank you.
I have maybe this is the last question. I guess this is from Robbie. I have a question. Have you been on a date ever?
And now what?
Have you been on a date?
Have I been on a date? I was like the dating king. What do you mean? Was I? Yes.
I don't know.
I was a very active dater when I was a young man.
So I guess this is the answer of your question, Robbie.
That's all I can tell you.
Well, wow. Time goes so fast. Well, thank you so much, Jackson, for your time.
Welcome.
Thank you, everyone who joined and asked questions and share something.
I would like to.
Sure.
If I may.
Sure.
I would like to leave you with this because this isn't really so as mysterious as we're talking about. If, for instance, you either look into a mirror or you look into a kind of a clear glass, or you look at a reflective surface, or you look out a window and you look into the sky, and you sense right here, around and behind the eyes, there's a sense of presence of you. You're present, you're aware, and you're able to be aware that you're aware. And you're able to differentiate between your awareness and what it's aware of. And there's just this sense for a moment of just this, and there's like this equipoise of simply being awareness, resting its attention as itself. It's not actively attentive to any sort of outward movement of perception or inward activity of thought. It's the attention isn't going either outwards or inwards. It's just simply in an equipoise, resting, but it's aware of itself being aware. You notice this. You can notice this in the morning. You can look up into the sky, and it's not something you really can produce. It's something you just sort of are relaxed and you're present and you're aware. So for instance, very briefly, if you close your eyes and you look at a light source and you see the light reflecting on the inner of your eyelids, you can see kind of an orangey color. Could everybody who's watching do that now? You can see kind of an orangey color as you bring your eyes in the direction of the light source. You see kind of an orangey color with your eyes closed. What is it that's observing that orangey color? It doesn't have a me to it. It doesn't have an I to it. It's just a knowing of this orange being present. And that which is aware of this orangey color being present, that's this absolute awareness. That's your presence of awareness that never, ever at any time changes. It's just right here and it's aware. So you open your eyes and it's aware. It's always just this empty, clear presence of awareness.
Thank you, Jackson.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, I couldn't read all your comments or questions, but
thank you so much. Thank you so much.
You. I would like to share just in the end that yeah, you can support Nothing and become a member. You can find the information on the website if you would like.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye now.
Thank you again. Bye.
Thank you very much, Jackson.
Bye. See you soon.
Very welcome. Thank you so much.
Take care.
You also.